Greetings. I'm Mike Hyter, President and CEO of the Executive Leadership Council, and I'm excited to moderate today's panel. We've got next, positioning Black men for C-suite leadership in corporate America. I am certain that this is going to be a dynamic discussion because I'm joined by two distinguished leaders who are truly experts in their field. Ron Porter is a senior client partner at Korn Ferry's Global Human Resources Center of Excellence, where he helps chief human resource officers build high-performance organizations that strengthen their leadership and talent issues. I might add, Ron and I have known each other for a long, long time. It's nice to see him again. And Donald Comer, who's the Vice President of Decision Science and Analytics at FedEx. Wow, that's a mouthful, Don. Donald has spent over 30 years at FedEx, where he currently leverages data analytics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning techniques to drive operational change and create incremental business values for the company. Ron, Donald, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Very good to be here as well.
Good. Well, today's discussion, it's all about how we can play a role in designing an intentional and lasting diversity, equity, and inclusion plan to advance the next wave of Black male corporate talent and guide companies who are serious about attracting and retaining top flight Black professionals. Ron, I'd like to begin with you. Not too long ago, it seemed like we were making progress in terms of Black men in the C-suite with the likes of Ken Chenault as CEO of American Express and others. What's changed since then?
Well, I think a couple of things. I mean, it seemed like things had kind of stalled. In other words, you had the Ken Chenaults of the world, and there are a few others. But there was a sense that that's kind of good progress, and that's where we can kind of sit. I would say going to the George Floyd episode, there's been a renewed focus because there was almost a shift from African Americans or Blacks in the CEO suite and in direct reports to the CEO to women. The Floyd situation happens. I feel a little bit of a rebound. Still too soon to really say because those opportunities, are far and few in between. But I would suspect that if we look for the next 12, 18 months, there may be a little bit of an uptick in people of color in C-suite roles. I see a little bit of that with clients now when they say we've got, we would like to see a diverse slate and diversity being a proactive statement from the client. I see a bit more of that these days than maybe 2 years ago. So I'm cautiously optimistic that there'll be a bit of a rebound on that front, but it remains to be seen.
Well, cautiously optimistic is also good to hear, though, given your vantage point. So I appreciate that perspective. Donald, what are the barriers to advancing the C-suite leadership roles?
Part of what happened was that as the definition of minorities became broader, including people other than Black, we took the eye off the ball. There's been progress in terms of minorities in general, but we've become stagnant in terms of Black men, Black professionals as a result of that. And so what are the barriers? The barriers at that level, it's through engagement with the people who are already in place, who's pulling who up. We don't always have the networks that allow us to be in the circles that contribute to the contributions about who's next, who's in the succession plan, and how do we build the relationships when there are not people who look like us already there. The few that are there are dispersed so broadly that we don't necessarily have the opportunity to connect, to build networks, to earn sponsors that help us to move into C-suite and CEO roles.
Well, and just building on that point you just made, what do you think, Donald, that Black men who aspire to those roles can do better to position themselves for those opportunities in the first place?
I read this book a long time ago called The Art of the Long View. And that book talks about looking forward and having a plan and then working the plan. And if we make those decisions earlier in our career and make decisions all along the way that get us closer to spend a little extra time building a relationship that with somebody who's not necessarily in the circle that I know, that we look at what is important. They say most of those roles are P&L based roles. So I might be this phenomenal HR person or this phenomenal salesperson, but I need to move out into operations, or I need to do something that's going to give me a more balanced perspective to rise up to be a leader in the organization. It's important for us to flex our muscles in ways that we had not necessarily thought we would follow our path in terms of developing a craft and then applying it, but be more broad in terms of what our skill set looks like, so that as we rise up in the ranks, we can be fascinated with the business and understand not just my craft, but all the dynamics of the business.
Okay. I really appreciate that perspective. Be fascinated with the business. That's well said. Well said, brother. So let me ask you, Ron, what are the opportunities to advancing to C-suite leadership roles? Where are they?
Well, I would say today, probably more than ever, the market, if you will, is hot. You know, hot as a $5 pistol, as people used to say. You can imagine that's pretty cheap and pretty hot. Right. But I still think a lot of the roles, there's a challenge getting into those C-suite roles. Because take HR for an example, which I'm obviously very familiar with. To be a CHRO, oftentimes they want you to have been a CHRO. To be a CFO, they want you to have had CFO experience. So coming from the outside, if we're doing a search for a C-suite role, 9 chances out of 10, they're going to expect to see somebody who's been in that role, maybe a bit smaller company, but they want somebody who's been there. And so the trick is, how do you get that experience if you have to have that experience to get it? The old conundrum. So one way would be to go from a larger organization to a bit smaller. If you're ready to be C-suite participant, and I've had these conversations almost every day with people of one sort or another, to say, I'm the number 2. And do I wait or do I take something smaller and get to be a number 1 and take arguably maybe scale-wise a step down, but responsibility a step up? I would encourage people to do that because it's tricky. You do see those moves happen. When they do happen, it's internally. But I'd say when it happens internally, it's usually somebody who's been groomed, who's got mentors, and has had exposure. The big thing, exposure to the board. And I would be one piece of advice I'd give for anybody who aspires to be C-suite. If they're not on the senior team now, which would be obvious, this situation, you got to figure out and take any opportunity you can to get exposure to the board. So you know how that operates and they know who you are. But I would say in many cases, it's a sidestep or a step down, perhaps outside of your organization, and to get the top job, and then you go from there.
Ron, given your experience, are there certain industries that are easier to navigate than others for Black men aspiring for C-suite roles?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say, I'm not sure if there's one industry or the other I would point to. The one thing I would say to that question, though, is to the extent you can get opportunities, maybe at the midpoint of your career, to go to a second industry. Because I've had conversations with clients who would say, we want somebody from our industry for whatever role it may be. And I'd say, well, we'll certainly find candidates who've had that. But on the other hand, there are also people who've maybe not had experience in your industry, but they've had experience in two different industries. So they benefited from transitioning from one industry to the other. So they've already done that. This might be the second transition into a third industry. But I would guess in short order, they'll kind of pick up the nuances of that industry and then bring to the table the diversity of their experiences in two other industries. And in some ways, I could make a case that might actually be better than having somebody who's only worked in your industry or perhaps a little bit myopic versus somebody who's worked in two different industries already and now going to the third. That might be a better situation if you want somebody who's going to bring a little bit of innovation to the table and do something that's not been tried and true within that industry. So, but it's hard to say which industry. I would say if you get a chance to work in a couple of different industries, the broader those can be and the further apart they are from one another is probably the best.
Yeah. You know, I have a closing question I wanted to ask the both of you. So in your opinion, what can corporations do, especially given the renewed commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to create corporate cultures that support the advancement of Black men to C-suite roles? Donald, we'll start with you. What can corporations
Thank you. I think what corporations have to do is to be more intentional about retaining their talent. Many of Black professionals come in, they do their best work, and they're excited when they join the company and think that their best work is going to catch the attention of someone and allow them to continue to progress. But quite often, that isn't working. So there's got to be a better way for them to become part of the fabric of the organization. Employee resource groups are a great way for the Black professionals to become part of the team, to be more integrated. But those groups also have to be focused on creating opportunities to be visible and not fall into the dynamic of making them cultural experiences, because those cultural experiences are not the things that's going to catch the attention of leadership and those in positions to affect the change that they are looking for. I also think that sometimes we have to be more intentional about bringing some positive visibility to us. There's a quote, I'm probably going to mess it up, that Ursula Burns used to talk about, that when I walked into the room, they knew I was there because I told them I was there. So I think that in order to be impactful and to get on the radar, we're going to have to let leadership know that we're there and get the right visibility for a quality job, and not just assume that they're watching and our work is going to net us the promotion or the advancement that we're looking for in our careers.
Well said. Thank you, Donald. Ron, how about you? What can corporations do to create corporate cultures to support the advancement of Black men to C-suite?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. Like, one, as an individual, as a man of color or a woman of color, you've got to be proactive in reaching out. Because one of the things I realized over the course of my career, and as a kid growing up, you had this notion your parents would tell you, keep your head down, do good work, and good things will happen. I'd say that's a little bit naive. There are a lot of people doing that.
Yeah.
You've got to be a little more proactive. And I would say,
definitely agree.
The other thing I would look at and say, and I recall this at PepsiCo, which was considered at the time to be a well-managed organization. But I realized as I was in the CDO role there for a while, where I think I met Michael, and had been in that organization for a while, that in fact, we really weren't that good at managing people. People didn't get good feedback. It wasn't candid. And I thought, the white guys, the workplace majority, tend to do better in that environment because they're more likely to find a mentor, somebody to guide them through. Not all of them, some of them. It's a little harder for that one African-American female to find a mentor to guide her through that broken field. But as I thought about it, and some of this goes to the work, Global Innovations, Jay Howard, and all of that, and really opened my eyes to this, is that nobody's really getting good management. But in a broken field, it's more likely that a white guy is going to get adopted and have a mentor to guide him or her through that. or a white guy. Say.
Yes.
Not as likely. So the thing organizations can do is really comprehensively and universally manage people for the individuals that they are, not one size fits all, because it's not going to fit everybody. It might disproportionately fit white guys, but even there, it's not going to fit everybody. But at the end of the day, what organizations really should be focused on, how do you manage each person for the individual they are to allow them to realize their fullest potential? I think the opportunities for that are probably better today than ever before. I think there's concern today in organizations. As a result, the cultures, for better or worse, maybe a little bit more watered down. It's a little easier to break into an organization. You don't need the secret handshakes and all of that often don't make sense. Unless you've been there for 20 years. So the setup is there. Now it's a matter for organizations maximize the capability and the potential of the individuals you have and treat and lead them as individuals. Maybe a little more work for the organizational leaders to do that. But the notion is you're not in a leadership role to make your job easier. You're in a leadership role to make the best of the talent you have, which you've got to spend the time individually working with each of them. You can't have one size fits all and say, I'm done. And if it doesn't appeal to Joe or Sally, then too bad for them. No, you're the leader. You got to get the most out of Joe and Sally too. And guess what? The other guys, you're probably not managing them the way that they would give you the best that they've got as well. But I think if organizations can just focus on how do we maximize our ability to manage and lead people, results will be much better. And I am certain, as a follow-on to that, there'll be more diversity at the top of their organization, because the people who are further from the norm are going to be the ones that have the hardest time making it work when there isn't really good training, good development, good focus on talent.
Wow. You know, when you think about it, is listening to you both too, is like, just be more intentional about giving people an opportunity as opposed to just being so protective.
Nice.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Imagine the world if that was happening, right? So that's really good. You know, one other, just a follow-up to the both of you, just from, we talked about what corporations can do, but in terms of Black men specifically, you know, what can Black men who aspire to be in the C-suite do to make themselves even more attractive and eligible for those opportunities?
Yeah,
well, I can go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that it is important for all of us to be continuous learners, to realize that even if we've had a good run, there's still more runway out in front of us, and that there's an opportunity for us to hone our skills, sometimes to even be sharpened by other people who look like us, who've had a different set of experiences. We talked earlier about building and expanding networks, finding organizations, finding others that are inside of the company you work for, and continuing to connect and look for other people to be accomplices in furthering not just your career, but the career of others who look like us in that network.
Ron.
Yeah, I would say, in my view, one of the most important things, I mean, beyond doing the work and being an expert in what you do and, you know, delivering, it's, if I had to use one word, it's about relationships. And I'd say it's 360, because if you're talking about C-suite, you're at a pretty good level already. And you can learn a ton from people that are down the chain a bit from you. So being proactive, being a mentor, focusing on that next generation can give you so much perspective and insight that can be helpful to you. And you probably end up, the mentoring relationships I've had, both as a protege and as a mentor, I would say I think I've learned as much about what's going on being a mentor as I have being a protege. Some eye-opening things that, boy, I wouldn't have been aware of that until my protege shared. But I think it goes 360, and it's continuously learning, continuously exposing yourself. I remember sitting in sessions with senior teams where people presenting would want to seem to have all the answers. And I thought, boy, I think the guys who make it to the top seem to be more interested in what the great questions are to ask versus how can I show you how smart I am?
Yeah.
I think it's that continuously learning, continuing asking, and don't be afraid to ask questions of senior people to get their learnings. I think most people would appreciate that. And I'd say I've seen very few senior people who wouldn't be willing to take a 20, 30-minute conversation just to get your perspective on things, not asking for a favor or anything like that, just asking for their opinion. And I'd say that usually works. Because one, I appreciate the fact that this person is asking that tells me something about them. And I also appreciate that they're pretty smart because they're asking me, which means they recognize my brilliance. So there's another message in there. But boy, you don't see that many people doing that. And the people I have seen, those are the ones who seem to get to the top of the organization. It's that continuous learning and not being afraid to sit down and ask people for time, and not for a favor, but for their point of view.
Yeah. Wow. Well, first of all, let the record show you both are brilliant. So I just want to put it out there. But this has been a really great discussion. And, I wish we had more time to dive even deeper into these issues, but it was just really, really good. Thank you, Ron and Donald, for contributing to this critically important conversation. I know it provided some great insights for all of our brothers hoping to climb the corporate ladder. It's going to take persistence and hard work, but it will certainly be worth the journey. And you all brought it this afternoon with some perspectives that I know everybody will benefit from. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.